Well, I think Zelensky is all but admitting publicly that Ukraine's position is hopeless. Ukraine is effectively lost. They've taken thousands and thousands of casualties. We think the number of dead is approaching 200,000. That's largely because of this tenacious defense of Bakhmut. And the Russians, of course, welcome this opportunity because they could apply all of their rockets, missiles, artillery fire against concentrations of Ukrainian infantry. And they've inflicted enormous casualties on them. And the place is still going to fall, which was always inevitable, but I'm afraid Zelensky would not listen to his generals who said, look, let's get out, set up a new defense and fight further. Now he's really in bad shape. He has very little in reserve. Equipment, very modest, but the problem is the best soldiers are dead. So he's now shoving boys, old men, women into the breach. It's not going to work. So what we can say is that Zelensky's telling everybody, I've lost. And if you're not going to come here and win the war for us, it's over. Well, two things. The people I talk to on the Hill that are obviously friendly to me are telling me the administration has no military strategy. What they have is a media strategy. The media strategy is to convince everyone every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that Ukraine can win, that Ukraine is close to victory, that the Russians are falling apart, the Russians are demoralized. Well, that's weakening now. There are very few people that buy that narrative any longer. Even the dumbest observer can see that the Ukrainians are taking terrible losses. Now, there's a second problem. And that is that right now, all of the complex equipment, HIMARS, complex surveillance equipment, drones, these kinds of things, are operated by contractors. Well, the contractors are NATO military personnel who are not in uniform, who are operating as contractors. If you try to send F-16s over there, they're going to need American pilots, or German pilots, or French pilots, or somebody else. They can't possibly do it. So this is the slow slide into war that many people have really worried about for a long time. And I think the administration is struggling now. Do we admit failure, or do we slide the rest of the way into direct confrontation with Russia? Yes, I think it's important that Americans understand that historically, public broadcasting, specifically National Public Radio, has been a good mouthpiece for the State Department. If you wanted to know what the thinking was at Foggy Bottom about anything, but particularly about foreign interventionism, which is really what they've been all about for 30 years, you turn to NPR, and they would praise wherever you went and whatever you were doing. Oh, we're intervening in Bosnia, intervening in Iraq, intervening in Kosovo. It's all good news. Well, what's interesting about this article is it's not good news. They're admitting that the weight of Russian manpower as well as military power in general is crushing Ukrainians. They're essentially telling the reader, this is not going to work. No amount of Ukrainian valor is going to stand up to the firepower. They're being pushed back. You've got to read between the lines a little bit, but that's essentially the message. The message is Ukraine can't win. Now that's very, very important because, again, that's expressing a view that's probably held inside circles in the State Department. We also had a meeting yesterday between Mr. Blinken and Mr. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister in our State Department. And this was supposed to be a meeting where Mr. Blinken was going to make it clear that we would stay the course and fight forever and so forth. Well, when they walked out, Lavrov walked out very briskly, and Mr. Lincoln sort of slinked out with his head down. I think Lavrov read the riot act to him. And I don't think our threats ring with much credibility. You know, he knows, the world knows, Americans are not going to support a war in eastern Ukraine. They're not going to support the movement of 1 million American soldiers to Europe to fight it. It's not going to happen. And it puts everything at risk, including the United States. The Biden administration knows if it does this, they're finished politically. So they're edging up to this abyss that they don't want to jump into, which is the abyss of we've got to come to an arrangement. We've got to settle this thing. But settling it means admitting certain things. Most important, that they misjudged the Russians. Remember, initially, I think it was Mr. Putin who misjudged us. He thought, well, I'll intervene, I'll use a small force, I'll make it clear that we're serious and Americans will listen to us, and then we'll have a negotiation. Wrong. We took the opposite position. We said, this is wonderful. He's walked into Ukraine with this little force. They're not very good. We can crush them. So we'll pour on all the equipment, assistance, and cash that we can. We'll hire all of the mercenaries. We'll send Polish soldiers by the thousands over there in Ukrainian uniform, and we'll win this. Well, we misjudged the Russians. The sanctions had no impact. The Russians said, no, this is as vital to us strategically as northern Mexico would be to us. We wouldn't tolerate this sort of thing in northern Mexico, threatening the United States. The Russians aren't going to tolerate it in eastern Ukraine. We completely miscalculated, and now we're sitting staring at a disaster. This force that we armed in Ukraine is destroyed. They're losing thousands of people, on average anywhere from 500 to 800 a day. That's roughly a battalion every day vanishes. This cannot go on. They are running out of ammunition. They have no more 155 millimeter artillery ammunition. The Russians have stockpiled artillery that will last them for 30 months. Rockets, missiles, drones, hard shell ammunition. They've now expanded their force. It's up over 750,000. They plan to go to 1.5 million. This is serious stuff as far as the Russians are concerned, and we haven't taken it seriously. We thought this was an opportunity to harm Russia. All we've done is weaken NATO, harmed our credibility in the world's eyes. And now we've got to admit we made a mistake and come to an agreement, because if we don't, what is to stop the Russians from crossing the Dnieper River, occupying Kiev, and marching all the way to the Polish border?